Greetings and welcome to Luca Sprues. In today's video I will build and review the 1/72nd scale IBG 917T German Ford truck. To start off with, I washed all the sprues in warm soapy water to clear any grime and oils from the production process and to help the paint conform to the surface. Assembly began with the engine. It's very nicely detailed and included photo-etched parts, which is a very nice inclusion straight out of the box. The sprues are pretty much free of flash, and the details are all very nicely moulded and very crisp. I used a pair of tweezers to apply some of the smaller parts for the engine. The engine was a little bit delicate, but the details were very nice, especially for something just part of the kit. Next came the chassis and the suspension. All of the parts were well moulded, but a lot were fragile and small. Careful sanding, very gentle cutting, and patience was required. The transmission and suspension was very nicely detailed and the parts fitted together pretty well. However, there were some spots with low contact, which made it very difficult sometimes for the parts to stay in place. It just takes a little bit of time to hold them together while the glue dries. The kit also comes with photo-etched parts, which is very nice for out of the box. These included a small metal fan and the tow hooks, along with some stowage containers and some straps. I applied all of the photo-etched parts using a cocktail stick and a bit of super glue to hold them in place. Once the photo etch was on, I glued the engine in place and attached the radiator and the exhausts. Once those steps were complete, I moved on to the next section of the truck, the cab. The kit has a very nice detailed interior which includes an instrument panel, nicely moulded seats, sticks and padding on the doors, which are all modelled very well. There is also a steering wheel and some of the pedals. Assembling the interior was pretty simple and the parts fitted together well. The only fiddly bits were the steering wheel and the gear shifters. I painted the interior of the cab Tamiya XF63 German grey, the same colour as I planned to paint on the outside. I did 2 coats on the inside and I also applied some coats onto the chassis. I choose to use the Tamiya acrylic colours because they're easy to clean up and very easy to work with and have good drying time, as well as work time. When I paint, I make sure to do it in layers. Even if the first coat is very thin and you can still see the plastic colours underneath, it's okay. Just keep building up in very thin layers until you have a good result. I painted the seats and also the door pockets and padding XF59 Desert Yellow. Using a very small brush, I carefully dry brushed flat aluminium over the details inside the cab and in the engine. This gives a weathered effect and also makes the details pop out. I also applied it to the radiator piece, carefully filling in the grille and trying not to paint the German grey frame. An easy way to add details such as the instrument dials and a little bit of weathering and to help the details pop out is to use slightly wooded down Tamiya XF1 flat black. The flat black will flow into the cracks and seams, producing extra detail and also giving a weathered, oily look and appearance. I do this trick also on the radiator. Once the heavy wash is applied all over the engine to give it a dirty, greasy appearance and also make the very nicely done details pop out more, I painted the exhausts titanium gold. Later on, I would also apply the same black wash in a much heavier layer onto the exhausts. This will give the impression of stains and streaks as well as leaks. I carefully apply very thin copper wiring using tweezers and a little bit of super glue on the copper wires to give the impression of the spark plugs and wiring for the engine. I also paint the fan belt red-brown. I attach the steering wheel and the radiator before painting the doors and the hood of the truck German grey. The door padding also received a coat of desert yellow, as I mentioned, the same colour that I used on the inside of the seats. I also apply a wash of flat black to bring out the details on the inside and give it a little bit of weathering. I painted the firewall German grey before heavily chipping it and applying a very heavy wash, since it would receive a lot of damage and grease and oil from the engine. The combination of chipping and heavy washes make the details on the plastic stand out and the model look extra realistic. The truck cab came together very easily with very little fit issues and no gaps. After assembling the cab, I moved on to the hood and the radiator grille. It was slightly fiddly to get the front sections of the cab to line up, but once they were in, it was nice and there was no fit issues. I then moved on to the side guards, but left the doors and the hood unglued so that I could open it later. Finer details were added on, such as the mirrors, the blinker lights and the headlamps. There was also some nice photo etch parts for a fuel canister holder. I used a Stanley knife carefully to drill out the holes for the headlamps. With the cabin fully assembled, I moved on to the final part, the cargo bed. The kit has two options for the cargo bed, either with the cover over the cargo bed or without it. I wanted to be able to switch between the two for stop motions, so I built the sides without the cover but didn't glue them to the bed, so I could swap between parts. I used a Stanley knife by dragging it over the back of the cargo bed to add to the wood grain effect and attach the fine details, including some photo etch to the back of the truck. The kit had two options for colour schemes, either the Dunkelgelb for the Africa core or a German grey coloured scheme from the Eastern Front. I went with the Eastern Front scheme. I began by painting the entire truck with a very thin coat of German grey. I watered it down heavily, and like I said, I build it up in layers. The first layer is still pretty see-through, but the second and third start to really give the truck the colour it needs. I assembled the cargo bed sides, but left the rear door unglued, instead adding some pieces of balsa wood so that it could sit comfortably between the sides and be raised or lowered or held in place with blue tack if needed. After assembling, I painted the sides and the single piece with the canvas roof. I also painted the finer details later on, such as the tyres, with flat black. For the canvas cover, I would paint it field grey, as the instructions said. Once the wheels were neatened up and fully dried, I glued them to the chassis. The axles were very thin, so I had to take care not to snap them when putting pressure on to fix the wheels. With the wheels attached and the truck painted, I then moved on to the weathering stage. I wanted to give the impression that the truck was heavily used and received very little care from its owners. So I began with some very heavy metal chipping, using a very fine brush on the raised details and edges of the wheels and chassis. I continued with adding a little bit of metal on the cab, especially on the radiator grille, fenders and the gaps between the panels and the doors. This is where most chipping would occur, since people sometimes scratch it when they're getting in and out or using tools to fix things. Sometimes rocks and stuff would also get thrown up onto the fenders, which would expose the original metal below. I also weathered the cargo bed using the flat aluminium chipping on the frame and the metal locks and bolts, before dry brushing the entire area flat earth over the wood. I tried to keep some grey showing through on the sides, but a lot less on the actual cargo bed floor. This is to give the impression that freight and items have scratched the paint off over time and exposed the wood underneath. I dry brushed some of the desert yellow colour over the top of the flat earth. If the colour was uniform, it would not look like realistic wood graining. This adds an extra pigment, which makes it look more realistic. Once the weathering was done, I applied more German grey over the top to give the impression that the paint was still attached. I also wanted to tone down the effect I'd accidentally overdone. To break up the uniformity of the weathering, I sometimes painted single panels of wood German grey before wetting it down slightly. I then moved on to the finer details, such as the Ford badge using medium blue and the license plates with white, before giving the canvas cover a final coat and then applying 2 washes. The first wash was flat black to bring out the engraved details and give a slightly greasy and oily look. I applied it all over the model, with a heavier focus on the areas such as the cargo bed and the grille, where weathering would be more likely. After the wash had dried a bit, I added on fine details such as the convoy light using gloss red and the decals. There weren't many decals for this kit, but they all went on very well and I don't have any issues with them. I also added on the clear plastic parts for the windscreens. The final stage of weathering was to add the dirt and mud effects. I used a mix of paint and also some washes to bring this out. I used primarily flat earth on the fenders, the tyres, the wheels, the running board, the windows, and also flicked some of it up on the sides to create the dirt effect. I also chip it slightly onto the edges. By applying the paint in a wash, you can easily rub it off and also create a slightly transparent effect. I used a cotton bud to go over where the wipers would be to create the effect of the wipers swishing the dirt off the windscreen. I made sure to heavily add the paint onto the bottom areas of the vehicle and rubbed it off slightly. Flicking the watered down paint also can create the splash effect of mud getting splashed up onto the vehicle. And with that, the model was completed. Overall, this kit takes a little bit of time and patience as a result of its nice details and sometimes fiddly parts, which can be a bit fragile, but with patience, care and experience, this kit goes together well and gives you a very nice example of the Ford 917T. I very much enjoyed building this kit and would recommend it to those with a bit of experience. Thank you very much for watching and supporting our channel. And I'd also like to thank our patron, Archie. Thank you very much, old chap, for your donations. And I'd also like to apologise for the pause in content. It's been a bit of a busy time personally, but we'll soon have more videos out soon, including another stop motion, hopefully in the next month. So stay tuned. Thanks for watching, comrades, and model on!